All right. Welcome everyone to our second webinar of the season, an in-depth look into Lawrise Max and VITA, our two new microbial soil amendments for newly planted trees. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to attend today. My name is Elsa Kuzno, and I lead the Forestry Technical Support Team here at Lallemand Plant Care. This webinar will be presented by our Technical Marketing Manager, Rhoda DeYoung, who leads our forestry research trials here at Lallemand Plant Care. And so with that, without further ado, take it away, Rhoda.
Thanks, Elsa. Welcome everybody. I'm excited to share with you some of the work that we've been doing lately on our two latest products in Canada. These are quite exciting to talk about because you get to talk about soil health and how that impacts tree health. Because often we aren't really thinking about what's going on underneath the ground and how important that can be for so many things in terms of our trees' ability to thrive. So first I'm going to talk about just a little bit of an overview about soil health. And just to set the stage, let's talk about our overall product portfolio. Some of you are really familiar with all of the different products that we have available at Lallemand Plant Care. Whereas some of you may only be familiar with, for example, our Lulcide chondro, which is a fungus that we use for controlling invasive shrubs, or our triazine, which is a botanical insecticide that we use for controlling invasive insects in urban trees. But today's focus is going to be on our Lawrise products, which are in general called biofertilizers, but you'll see they're also so much more. So let's just get started. If you've ever looked at anything with regards to soil microbiota or the diversity of soil, you can see that a healthy soil is a living, breathing soil with a multitude of microorganisms working hard to do so many things for our plants and in turn for us. But in this slide here, kindly used from a recent publication by Valier. If this is a topic you're really interested in learning more about, this is a great overview publication where they focus on four key microbial groups. The one is nitrogen fixing rhizobia, and then arbuscular mycorrhizae fungi, also known as endomycorrhizae fungi, and then ectomycorrhizae fungi, and then plant growth promoting rhizobacteria. And each one of these four groups has a really key role to play. And you'll see that often this is in terms of helping a plant deal with stress. And then as well, even in environments that aren't, incredibly stressful, just helping the plants thrive and grow and really reach their optimal potential as plants or trees. And it's really important to think about these sorts of things when you're looking at any sort of microbial soil amendment that you'd be using on your trees, because there's a lot of new products out there in terms of microbials, and some of them are excellent and some of them are a little lacking. One of the big things to look out for is whether the microbial amendment that you're applying is actually a living microbe. Does it have something that will be able to grow and develop? It's great if you can put some mycelial fragments on your plants, but if they're not living and breathing and growing, they're really just going to act like a really expensive fertilizer. So that's one important thing to always kind of have in mind when you're looking at these soil amendments. Another thing that I'll be talking about briefly, particularly when it comes to endomycorrhizae fungi, is how effective the microbe you're using is at colonizing plant roots. And this is because not all strains of even the same species are created equal. It's something that we think about and is a little bit more easier to explain now that we've all been through COVID. Like, we know the difference between Omicron and original COVID, in terms of how it can colonize our bodies. And it's the same thing for microbial amendments too. Some of them are excellent colonizers and some less so. So it's important to pick strains that are really good at colonizing. And then overall, you want to be continuing to look at overall soil health and not just plant health. When you think about soil health, you're going to be thinking about things that these microbes need to survive, like pore spaces to grow in, at least some organic matter for them to develop with, proper pH, proper temperatures. So these are all sorts of things that go into our thinking when we're looking at best application practices for microbial technologies, and even when we're developing these microbe strains in the first place. What I want to talk about is plant growth promoting Rhizobacteria, or the nice handy little acronym PGPR. And our PGPR is called Lawrise VITA. Lawrise VITA is a great little bacillus, so bacteria, that we can use in a lot of environments, but particularly in areas where you may not have a lot of microbial activity. Bacillus are known for being great primary colonizers. They will come in first and really can help give plants that little starter boost, really help them start forming microbial relationships, and are one of those first colonizers in the soil. And you hear bacteria, you think, E. coli, but there's plenty enough really good bacteria out there in addition to the bad guys. How does it work? What our bacteria does, or our Bacillus velizensis is the specific species name, is it forms a relationship with the plant roots. And in addition to the carbon that those plant roots are giving the bacillus is working hard to solubilize nutrients that are in the soil around those roots that the roots otherwise wouldn't be able to capture, but as well wouldn't be able to unlock. I'm sure you've heard before that there's plenty of phosphorus in the soil, but so much of it is locked up. It's inaccessible to plants. Fortunately, it's accessible to this bacillus. And so this unique bacillus will actually solubilize the phosphorus, basically unlocks it, and then hands it over to the plant. So then the plant can then use that phosphorus to extend its root growth, to improve its caliper, to improve its height, as we'll see in some of the research trials that I'll be sharing today. So I always really like this electron microscope picture. This is like zooming way down at the root hair level. And all of those tiny little green dots are bacillus. And so you can see they're colonizing that root. They're glomming on, forming a relationship with them. So that way they can give them the phosphorus that they need, and really help improve and stimulate the root growth. This results in increased phosphorus in those plants. So if you did nutrient samples in these plants, you'd see their phosphorus levels are higher. And then, of course, overall improves the vigor, the growth, and the quality of these trees. And another thing that I really like about this is that it's really optimizing your fertilizer use. So any fertilizer that you're putting on these trees is able to be accessible to these trees. You're not worried that any of it's going to be locked up in the soil and unusable. So it's really reducing your waste and allowing the bacillus to do a lot of the work for you. So this is what it looks like. It comes in a little packet with a resealable top, and it's a wettable powder that smells an awful lot like Kraft dinner, which is a little disarming when you first open it the first few times, but you get used to it. I kind of really like it, actually. And you can store it in a cool, dry place for up to 24 months. And so it's something where this powder mixes really well with water. So you can either add it to like a big tank mix. You can, if you're doing just a small treatment, you can just mix it with water with a whisk and do like a drench. Works really well in irrigation lines. So it's a really handy portable formula. So with that, let's talk about some of our results that we've had from these young tree trials. We worked with a number of different nurseries, different growers, and a whole variety of tree species. It would take me all day to share with you all the trials we've done. So I'm just going to share a few that are really representative of what we see. They're not all the very best results that we've had, but they're just very representative, which I think is important because I don't want to give you the impression that these are the very best of the best of the best results. They're just what you can expect to see when you're using this product on your nursery trees. So in this case, with black cherry, what we did is we set aside 4 trays at the nursery, where 4 were given just Lawrise VITA at 0.1 grams per seedling, and dissolved in 30 milliliters of water per seedling. And that was applied 3 times over the summer. So typically at about 3 to 4 week intervals. So once in June, once in July, once in August. And then the untreated trees were trees and trays that were treated exactly the same, but instead of getting the Lawrise VITA, they only got that 30 milliliters of water. So everything else about them was exactly equal. And they also all were part of the nursery's typical fertilizer regime. So the nursery didn't do anything different from what they normally do, which has, provided them great success. It's a great nursery in their tree growing ability. But then just 4 of these trays received the VITA, and 4 of them just received VITA with water. And then we tracked these trees over the summer. What we found was by the end of the year, we could see numerical benefits to the trees on the lower level here. All of these are the trees that were given the Lawrise VITA. So you can see they're taller in height, greater in caliper or root collar, greater dry weight, and greater dry shoot weight. And you can even see here in the picture that the Lawrise VITA treated trees have a really nice, like bushy root mass, lighter, finer root hairs, and just generally looks more vigorous overall. So as research scientists, when we're coming out and we're measuring these trees, you can see, oh yeah, it looks like they're taller for height. Oh yeah, it looks like they're greater for caliper. But then when it comes to the dry root weight, we cut these roots, we put them in bags, we send them off to the lab, and we sit and wait until they're dried and weighed, and we get the data back. And I'm going through all the data. And then I was just blown away to see that in the end, like these treated trees that just received, 0.1 gram of the Lawrise VITA 3 times a year, had roots that were an entire gram heavier than the control trees. So that's 20% more. And when you think about that in terms of, where they're going on to their next stage of development, that's, 20% more water they can access, 20% more nutrients they can access. It's just such a benefit for that plant to just have that additional root mass in particular. And just really kind of cool results for us to see. And those were both highly significant differences, both in terms of the dry root weight and the caliper too. And so in addition to, deciduous trees, we've also done deciduous coniferous trees. We did a couple trials on larch. This trial was run very similarly to the results from the cherry, or the trial for the cherry that I just went through. Again, the control trees are just getting water. The treated trees are getting Lawrise VITA, and both are still part of the standard fertilizer program in the nursery. And then when you look at this figure here, the gray bars refer to the height of the trees. The red refer to the caliper. And on the left is just the full fertilizer trees. And on the right are the trees that receive the full fertilizer plus Lawrise VITA. And we see improvements in height, additional 2 inches in height, improvements in caliper. And then what was really important to the grower too was that there was improvements in selling categories, because it's well and good if you can make a tree grow higher, but if it's already going to be one of the tallest trees anyway, it's not necessarily benefiting the grower. It might be benefiting the tree, but not the grower. And so it was really quite cool to see that when you put these trees in the different selling categories, we saw such a bump up in this highest value selling category. 16% more if they received just that small dose of Lawrise VITA, which is just really quite encouraging. We've also done trials on a number of different oak species. So this is a trial where we had, I love these little acorns, and you can see they're just starting to split open. They're so adorable. Um, on this trial, again, it was very similar. We had these crates set up with the acorn seeds in them. They received the regular fertilization treatment, and then half received just water, the other half Lawrise VITA plus the water. And again, the same very small dose. We tracked these trees throughout the year. And then what we found was that in the end, you had an additional 38.7% of the trees treated with Lawrise VITA that were ready to be planted in the field. And that was really important because the other ones, you're not really going to be able to do much with. So every tree that you can now move on to the next stage of production is a tree that's not wasted. And that's really part of it, is you don't want to have to waste trees. You don't want to have to waste your time. And for every tree you grow, you want it to grow to its fullest potential. So we actually replicated this trial then again just this past year, but on a large scale. So here we're just working with 80 trees. But here we did 26,000, so quite a jump. But we wanted to make sure that the results we were seeing at this really small scale could also be replicated when the nursery grower is doing it all themselves, without us being there to, drench the VITA on these oaks. And so they just did the normal planting practices, normal fertilization practices, and then just added the VITA to half of the oaks, and half of them didn't. And then they found, similar to our little tiny trial, just remarkable improvements in the number of trees that were ready for grafting and for the next stage. And so this was a 20% increase for them, which on this scale of trees is is quite a huge jump. And I hope they have enough space for all these oaks now, because so many of them did not have to get wasted and are able to continue on their path of production. So just really encouraging results to see. And this does result in quite excellent return on investment for many of these small tree nurseries. This was one trial we did just this past year with Urian Pears. This is kind of a unique species in that its selling categories are judged almost entirely on caliper, and it's really difficult to reach the top selling caliper, so the highly sellable over 6 millimeter caliper just in 1 year. And so what we did is we worked with the nursery staff here. They treated the trees, and then they sorted them for us, and we just came and had looked at their numbers, and we're just terribly impressed to see that on the scale of about 1,000 trees, you saw an additional $400 in benefit just by adding a small amount of Lawrise VITA. So we calculated that for every dollar spent for these Urian Pears, the nursery made over $13 in additional sales that they wouldn't have made. So that's not going to be the case for every single tree species. In a lot of our cherry trials, it was for every dollar spent, it was between $4 and $8. But still, it's quite a remarkable benefit for very little effort and just a small amount of product. But it's all about working with the living system and treating the soil with a living product that's really able to optimize the fertilizer use that you're already applying onto these trees, and reducing waste and making sure they can thrive to the best of their abilities. We've also done a number of trials in open field. This is an orchard where the grower has actually not added any nitrogen inputs in this field for many, many, many years. It's a nice sandy soil, it's nice and porous, so you don't have issues with compaction. But it's a soil where really all that was added in the last couple of years was just a small amount of Lawrise VITA on these treated trees. And so we were very pleased to see that by even without adding, additional fertilizer, just using what was available within that soil already, all that, locked up phosphorus in particular, these trees saw an additional height growth and additional growth in the diameter, over 15% and over 18%. in those treated trees. And it was actually quite fun. So I'm walking down these rows with the grower, who's just a cool guy. Like, he was a medical doctor for most of his life, and now is, planting orchards, making cider, just really neat. And he walks up to the trees on the left, the untreated control trees, and just yanks out a tree. And then he goes over to the Lawrise VITA one and yanks out another tree. And this is what we see. There's decent root growth on the control, but it looks puny compared to that what you see on the Lawrise VITA. And that's where you can really see what the mode of action is going here, that the Lawrise VITA is really improving what you see underground, improving the ability of those roots to continue to grow, and just finer root hairs, just everything about that root mass is just so delightful, and just really kind of cool to see that even if you just yank out a random tree here or there, you can see those benefits as well. And that's similar to what we see in the nurseries too, where you had a student just randomly pull out some plugs of trees that were treated with Lawrise VITA versus the control. And this is what you'll see too, just a lot more of those root hairs. Really improves that root growth. What I like about this is, so I often am working in urban planting pits. And we all know that a nice ideal planting pit is this beautiful little saucer shape, and that, the soil would be amended and actually possible for those roots to penetrate. But we know that's not the case often. And so in those planting pits, you might have a deep bowl, and the sides of that bowl may be like almost impenetrable clay. So when I see what's happening in these small roots, I know that that's the same sort of process that's occurring in my urban field trials, even though I can't just yank out a big, black cherry in somebody's front lawn to take a look at the roots. It's the same thing, where you are giving those roots the chance to penetrate beyond that nearly impenetrable planting pit. And you're giving them the ability to work beyond just their root ball and access all the nutrients that might be unlocked in the soil all around, and really giving it quite a good chance at life and growth in the urban forest. Just in summary, it's really easy to apply, wettable powder. Its main goal there is to optimize the fertilizer use that you have on those trees, and does this by also solubilizing the phosphorus that's available in the native soil. We found it's really scalable, usable in many different systems. And then we continue to see these clear improvements, often very visible improvements in overall growth and the health of the tree. And then, we found that it does work well, even in urban forestry, in that horrible soil, as long as it's part of proper planting practices. They do need some pore spaces to survive, and they do need to be watered, all those wonderful things. But it's just been such a wonderful product to work with, and a really cool strain of this Rhizobacteria. So when we put that in context of our, little picture here of overall soil life, we see, it's a really good living microbe, has effective colonization, optimizes fertilizer use, isn't just a fertilizer in itself, and really focuses on overall plant and soil health there, accessing all that unlocked nutrients there in the soil around that tree. So from there, let's talk about this little blue circle here, the arbuscular mycorrhizae fungi, otherwise known as endomycorrhizae fungi, because it grows within the cells of those fine root hairs. And endomycorrhizae is the one that you find in many, many different plants throughout the world. The numbers change as the science changes and more studies are done, but I think at least 85% of all living species have a relationship with arbuscular mycorrhizae fungi in order to grow and survive. So our arbuscular mycorrhizae fungi, or endomyc, is Lawrise Max, and it's a unique spore-based mycorrhizae for long-term vigor and tree growth. And that's really important. And I'm going to show you a nice little figure here of what happens is when you apply those spores at the time that the tree is planted, the spores start to germinate, and then they start extending their hyphae into the roots, and they form a relationship with those roots. So they colonize the roots, and you can already see that from that colonization, you are getting additional surface area that root is now able to reach out into, forming this large network of hyphae that reaches out into the soil. So everywhere that mycorrhizae, those hyphae networks, are reaching, now gives that plant the opportunity to access any water or any nutrients that are in that soil that their roots may not be present in. And so it really acts as an ability to extend that root network much, much further than those roots themselves can grow. And so, of course, that helps with absorbing more nutrients. And then what's really important with our Lawrise Max is it will continue to sporulate. When conditions are good, your soil temperature is above 10 degrees, your pH is somewhat neutral, they will continue to live and grow. And the beauty of that is you apply it once at the time of planting, and it will continue to live and grow and have this friendship with the tree for its entire life. They're lifelong friends. It's not something you have to continue to add or something that acts, really nicely at the beginning. It's there with the plant for its life. So some of the great benefits of Lawrise Max is it's a primary colonizer. There are lots of different mycorrhizae out there. This is one that does an excellent job of quick colonization of those roots. So that way you're almost forming that, it's like an early adopter, when you have an open field that's been completely stripped bare, and those first few plants that are growing up, maybe they're dandelions, those are your primary colonizers. But without them, you're not going to be able to break up the soil, and you're not going to be able to start having life in that open field. And it's similar with Lawrise Max, where it's one of those primary colonizers. It can survive in these microbe devoid environments. It improves that plant survivorship, forming a relationship with them, allowing those roots to have access to a much greater amount of surface area. And that improves, nutrient absorption and drought tolerance. And like I mentioned, that's just so wonderful. You apply it at the time of planting, and it gives you a lifetime of benefits. And this is what it looks like. Similar to Lawrise VITA, it comes in a little 1 kilo packet. There's a guarantee of over 2,000 spores per gram, and you store it very similar to the Lawrise VITA, where in a nice, cool, dry place for up to 24 months. So let's talk about some of the trial results from the Lawrise Max. One of our earliest trials was actually by colleagues in France. And that's probably why some of these tree species might look a little funny to you. These are the urban trees that they are planting in Europe. And so they will plant a Norway maple as a street tree, and whereas we have them everywhere, of course, but we don't actually plant them. And what they found was by adding the mycorrhizae to these trees, they were able to improve certainly the height in these different tree species and the diameter of the trunk of these trees. And these figures are in inches. So it was really encouraging to see that it worked really well on all of these different trees species. The trial was done in pots. And so in addition to this, we have a lot of field data. And orchards are wonderful, uniform environments to do studies in. So that's why you see a lot of orchard results here. Another trial in France, this was done on apricots. And here we saw clear improvements in both rootstock and grafting, caliper for these apricots. And this was actually a different trial here, these pictures, but also apricots. And here they were looking at more mature apricot trees and the overall improvement in canopy and shoot length of some of these leading shoots. And the differences in this trial were just very visible. You walk down the different rows and you could tell which ones were treated with the Lawrise Max. Another orchard trial, this time in Finland, on apple trees. And what's really cool about this trial was they didn't just use the Lawrise Max, they also used our Bacillus. So as I mentioned, our Lawrise VITA, it really helps with that starter effect when, the tree's undergoing transplant shock, really helps to extend the growth of the roots. And then the Mycorrhizae at time of planting works really well with that bacillus, and together it's like they're friends helping the plant even further by extending that root network farther, and then the mycorrhizae carrying on from the bacillus for a long relationship with that plant. So in this case they applied both the bacillus and a mycorrhizae, and you see very significant and very visual, very clear differences in the length of the leader shoot on all of these trees, and then the diameter of that leader shoot. And so in the end, they actually looked at the ability for these trees, the treated trees, to have additional fruit. And so they actually went out and they counted all the different blossoms and unripe fruit clusters on these trees to see what the yield differences would be between the untreated and the treated. So it was an additional 20% yield, which is just phenomenal. So just really cool to see how the two different microbes can work in concert with each other. So just in summary, an excellent colonizer if you're looking for a mycorrhizae, works extremely well at colonizing those roots in order to improve that root establishment, extend the network of the roots, and absorb additional nutrients and improve drought tolerance of these trees. And yeah, stays for the life of those trees. So it's wonderful that you applied the time the trees planted or transplanted for a lifetime of benefit. And as I mentioned, you put these two together, they're excellent partners. They work really well as a starter effect and then a long-term partner for these tree roots. I should mention too that they're OMRI listed, so they're safe for organic use as well. Thanks, everyone.